Before we start the main meeting this evening, I'm going to read out the emergency evacuation announcement. Should we be required to evacuate the building, would you please leave the building via the nearest available exit to the chamber? Our assembly point will be in the public car park at the side of the Civic Suite. Please do not delay your evacuation to collect any belongings. Please do not return to the building until given permission to do so by council staff. Please note that this meeting will be audio recorded. Thank you. Right, members, please be upstanding to receive the chairman, the chairman's chaplain and the managing director.
Good evening, councillors. Let's sit down. You may sit down.
Chairman, fellow councillors, the season of Advent is almost upon us, and in this season, within the Christian church, we are reminded of the silent years, or the apparent silent years, of God between the last prophet of the Old Testament and the miracle birth of Jesus as told in the Gospels of the New Testament. Yet in that period of silence, there was still hope in that time frame. In this fast approaching season of Advent, there are still the issues that the silent years had of poverty, homelessness, despair, and anxiety. There are still those who wield earthly authority and power. The question remains, where is hope? The answer, of course, is there is still hope. How do we see that challenge? Well, Pope Francis wrote this: "We must restore hope to young people, help the old, be open to the future, spread love, be poor among the poor. We need to include the excluded and preach peace." In the book of Hebrews, chapter 6, we read these words: "We have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure." The Christian message in this season of fast approaching Advent is that there is hope for a ruined humanity, hope of pardon, hope of peace with God, hope for glory, because at the Father's will, Jesus became poor. From this place, from this council chamber, the people of the community are desperately seeking hope, and responsibility lies within this chamber to bring hope in a despairing community. Let us pray. Father God, we are reminded that when you sent your Son Jesus into this world, there was hope. And that hope remains in this society, although fast changing and becoming ever increasingly secular. You are still present. And as council meets this evening, may the presence of Almighty God be sensed here. And all the discussions that are taken forward, bringing hope to the community that each councillor serves. And we ask these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And you're going to remain.
Yep, I'm going to sit at the back and enjoy.
So, Again, good evening, everybody. Before we start the formal part of our meeting, I'm asking for any tributes for the late councillor, Chris Black. Councillor Stanley.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. For many years, I'll start again, sorry. For many of us, it will take a long time to come to terms with the sudden news that our friend and colleague, Councillor Chris Black, has passed away. I'm sure that goes for all of those present tonight, and for many who served with this authority over the last quarter of a century. Our hearts go out to his wife, Elena, and grown-up son, Alex, who he loved and was loved by them for many years together. To try and do Chris justice within 5 short minutes, or indeed 5 hours, would be impossible. You will have your own memories, and I'm sure it will be those recollections that which we hold most dear. Chris was most definitely part of the furniture at the council, who definitely set the standard as a hard-working and loyal councillor, to which we all aspire, liked and respected by members from all sides over a 30-year period. He remained enthusiastic to the end. Despite his local popularity, each election was as nerve-wracking as the first for Chris. He never took his residents' support for granted, nor assumed he would be re-elected, but he always returned with a big majority. Chris was frequently out and about in the ward, where many of his residents still referred to him as young Chris, which was quite the compliment at 50 years plus. He was unstinted in his work throughout the year. Residents knew that if they had a problem, Chris could be relied upon to assist. Speaking to members, they all described Chris in the same way: a good debater, excellent on planning, a very amicable to approach, and a lovely man. Perhaps Chris Lumley, who worked with Chris for such a long time, sums up the kind of councillor Chris was. He says, Chris was highly intelligent, and his dedication to residents is well recorded. He was an expert on planning law and would always help a new councillor when asked. He was a brilliant debater. He was not a controlling leader of the group and was generous. He allowed me to represent the Liberal view on the Working Party, considering recycling and renovation of the Rayleigh Windmill. He was also very pleased with the work June did as chairman of the Review Committee. Chris loved the Rochford district and blogged about issues and items of interest on his online focus website, which was often politically neutral, welcoming all who had the area's interest at heart. Most of all, though, Chris was passionate about stopping the overdevelopment of Rayleigh and to protect the charm and character of the town where he had lived his entire life. Chris will be remembered for a long time, by so many people for his dedication to Rayleigh and Rochford district. He will be greatly missed. The donations raised at Chris's funeral in support of the Samaritans was nearly £600. And thank you to everyone who attended and donated to this charity that Chris was so passionate about. We would like to ask the leader of the council, with the support of the members, if a permanent memorial to recognise the hard work and length of the service that Chris Black gave, if this would be possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hookway.
Firstly, I say I think that Chris Black would have loved to have got his teeth into the agenda that's on this evening. Both Tina and I heard the sad news of Chris Black's passing whilst we were on holiday. Being in such a wonderful environment, the shock of this information was quite overwhelming, and it took a while to sink in. I began to reflect on the man I had only known for a few years and on some of his achievements. The obvious one being his long service to his community and the fact that he'd been a member of this council since 1984. To put this into perspective, I reflected on what I was doing at this time. I was studying at CVIC, like Chris had done a few years before, preparing to take my A-levels, one of which was politics and world affairs. I was contemplating a career in the RAF with the ambition of being a fast jet pilot, although this was never realised. I had just had my heart broken by my first girlfriend. The reality is that all my adult working life, Chris had been working for his community and getting himself re-elected, whatever the political climate. The only way for this man to achieve this feat is if he was admired and respected by the residents he represented. Fast forward to May 2014, and I'm elected to the council, 30 years after Chris, part of a new breed and quite green. I'm certain he was not quite sure what to make of me and my colleagues, like many of you, but it was not long before the gentleman that he was offering advice and being helpful. I soon recognised that this was someone I could respect and work with. We came from different political traditions and covered by different banners, but I do not recall having a political argument with Chris. There was discussion and sometimes a different point of view, but always conducted in a friendly and often jokey manner. Tina has told me of an occasion during a meeting when Chris expressed to her, "You have a good point and have argued it well, but I still do not agree with you." She could not have been offended by his remark. The last time I saw Chris, it was late September and a nice, warm, sunny afternoon, and we had both just arrived for a training session. As I got out of the car, he looked me up and down, and with a broad grin said, "I never thought I'd see the day a member attending a training course in shorts, and I'd never expect it of a UKIP person." I'm sure he was having a dig, but I laughed along with him, and this will be my lasting memory of Chris. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much for agreeing to include tributes to the late Councillor Chris Black in this meeting today. I'm grateful for that. And how sad I am to look across here and not see my friend. I looked across to Chris many times during debates for inspiration and support, and I always got it, and that's something that I miss already. Like everyone I've talked to about the news of Chris's very sudden passing, it was then, and it still is, a terribly sad shock. My thoughts remain with his family, Lena and Sasha. I first met Chris in a social capacity through mutual friends. It was actually through his best man. So I've known Chris for over 30 years. Well, it was 33 to be precise. And he was impressive then, even as a newly elected member. I was certainly well impressed. I kept bumping into him in community contexts, and I have no doubt at all that he inspired me to represent my own community. To any new member, as other members have already stood and said, he was very welcoming and helpful in sharing his experience, and none more so when I became a group leader myself. He supported me, he helped me, and he made me think about the role I had. We had many discussions. Certainly we didn't have any discussions of disagreement. It was always one where Chris was supportive and generous. We never put the phone down on each other thinking anything but, well, that was a very great exchange. I'm glad we had it. I know where we are, I know where we stand, and I knew when we came into the chamber that he would still support me. Chris has led an exemplary public life, and residents of Rayleigh and of course our district have much to thank him for over so many brilliant years. I have to come up with some anecdotal experience of Chris's influence. I was having coffee with friends in Cyprus, and a lady joined us, and she asked what part of Essex I came from. I told her that it was from Rochford, and the first thing she said was, "Do you know Chris Black?" I think that says it all. His influence had no boundary. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Hoy was next. Councillor Cutler, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I will be brief, although, as other people have said, Chris deserves far longer than we have time tonight to discuss or talk about. I first came into contact with Chris in about 2008, 2009, purely as a result of him contacting me and encouraging me to become a councillor for the Green Party, which was surprising for me because I'd not really been involved in politics like that before, where you've got members from different parties encouraging other parties to stand as a councillor. And we had some coffees and some discussions, and it continued from there. I've never failed to find Chris anything other than a gentleman and a lovely man. I think gentleman describes him very well, and that's been said many times, will be said again. And again, as Councillor Mr Mason says, I still expect him to be sitting over there, and he's not there, and it is very sad. It's a great loss to this council, it's a great loss to our residents. An example of his dedication was, I do remember one planning meeting when he was on holiday, and he turned up for the planning meeting, and I was talking to him, and he said, no, I've got to flight back early just so I could come to the planning meeting tonight. And that's his dedication.
Thank you. Councillor Cutler.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it was a great shock to all of us when we heard about Chris Black. I know that Sean phoned me and he said, I think he said, are you sitting down or are you prepared for a shock? And he gave me one. Because the last person I thought that would suffer the fate that Chris did would be Chris Black, because I can't remember when he last missed a meeting, frankly, because he was that sort of man. Having said that, of course, our relationship, if you can call it relationship as such, goes back over 17 and a half years when I was first elected as a young councillor, sitting just over there somewhere. And I can remember the planning meetings where he was actually sitting in front of me down on these seats. And we actually exchanged views on things during planning meetings, not too much, because we didn't want to annoy the chairman too much. But we actually supported each other because there was no politics to speak of in planning meetings in those days. And that was Chris. And there will be suggestions coming forward, not just about that, but about other things too. Inside the chamber, yes, of course, Chris, and I can still visualise him sitting there, and it seems strange without him because he's almost part of the furniture. You know, we challenge, if you like, and that's fine. You know, you need challenge as an administration, and he always gave that challenge, and he thought it through, and he was very clever and very cunning in the way that he did that, like nobody else. He could always find an angle in something, and that was Chris. But having said that, I can remember Chris when we were sitting here in meetings, particularly the planning meetings, and of course you've got to remember that Chris was a very busy man. He worked hard in his ward, in his constituency, and for his own people, but he worked hard in his work as well, and he worked long hours, and he had lots of phone calls, you know, with ships coming in, etc. And in those times, I can remember when the phone rang, which of course you're not really supposed to do in meetings, but you had to do it because if he had a ship coming in, he had to get there. And I remember us laughing because he put on sea shanties on his phone. and that seemed to be appropriate, really, for what he was doing at the time. But outside of the chamber, Chris and I had a good relationship. I can remember some of the interviews we had with the various chief executives that we had before, sitting down and chatting. And I could call him a friend. And there's not many people outside of my own party, if you like, that I can do that with. But I genuinely could do it with Chris. And if he actually had a principle, he'd stick to that principle. He wouldn't just change it for party matters and things like that. And I think this chamber will be less of a place without him. I think you can't replace Chris for what he had, with all respect to my colleagues here. And I think that's what's going to be missing from this chamber. So I do miss him. As far as the memorial is concerned, I think that's something to be considered. I'm sure we can look into that. And I'm sure my fellows would contribute to that as well, because that's the respect that we have for Chris. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Mrs Mason.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I agree with everything that I've heard from the previous speakers, and I can't match their eloquence. I just want to say that the late Councillor Chris Black was gently funny, kind and helpful, and the vast experience has left a huge vacuum in this chamber. I sat next to him for some time. He was always helpful. I also echo what Councillor Stanley has said, and Councillor Cutmore has kindly agreed that some sort of permanent memorial for his remarkable service. And I'm grateful that something will be arranged and implemented. I think that's fitting for such a lengthy service. So I thank the councillors, and good night, Chris.
Thank you, councillors, for that. At our last meeting, we had our silence for Chris, and I think everybody was in shock. So very few people, or nobody spoke in tribute to him because of that shock. I knew him as a very kind, knowledgeable man, and I know he will be very greatly missed by this council and by the residents in Rochford. So thank you for your kind words. So we will now start the meeting. And item 1 is apologies for absence. And I have 4 received in the office. Councillor Lumley, Councillor Elliott Mason, Councillor Mountain and Councillor Weston. Are there any more? No. Item 2, to receive declarations of interest. Are there any? No. Item 3 is the new local plan, issues and options document, draft consultation document, draft sustainability appraisal and consultation and engagement summary 2017. Call Councillor Spearing.
Thank you, Chairman. On the 17th of November, the Planning Policy Subcommittee met to discuss the new local plan, issues and options document, draft consultation documents. We discussed individually all 8 evidential documents, including the SHELA, the Strategic Housing and Employment Land Availability Assessment, duty to cooperate with other councils, the Gypsy and Travellers Accommodation Assessment, Infrastructure Delivery Topic Paper 2017. All of these documents meeting the current legislation requirements which have been put in place by successive governments. But of course these could change if central government move the goalposts. Officers' hard work has ensured that we in Rochford are ahead of the game in respect of our plans, whereas some other local councils have already been contacted by the government officials chasing for information regarding their plans. During our meeting, members asked numerous questions or sought clarification on various items, to which officers responded fully, and ultimately the net result of these discussions contributed to items 3 and 4 on this evening's agenda with the subcommittee's recommendations. No doubt members who were not permitted to ask questions on these documents at the subcommittee meeting will want to raise issues, but I'm confident that either officers, Councillor Ward and myself will be able to answer them, or alternatively give prompt responses after further investigations. While numerous issues were raised and answered or clarified as the case may have been, it is essential that we do our utmost to get the public to engage with these issues, as it will affect everyone presently in the district and those who will become residents in the future. We appreciate that this is a huge document, but we hope that residents who have concerns in respect of a particular issue will concentrate on that and submit their views during the consultation period. We are fully aware that our evidence in support of our plans for the future of our district must be robust and be able to stand up to intensive scrutiny from both within this chamber and outside, as will the evidence that we have received from third parties. We will also ensure that the evidence presented by other councils must be able to stand up to the same scrutiny to which they will subject us. I am sure we will hear the usual views that we cannot cope with more housing, the lack of infrastructure, etc., and that some people will try to score political points in relation to this long-term plan for our district. And while it's very pleasing to hear that County have stated infrastructure first, sadly, to date their track record does not support this aim. In my views, this is not just a Conservative group issue, but it is incumbent on everyone, both inside and outside this chamber, to work together for the best possible results for our residents and the successful future plan development of our district. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Chairman. First and foremost, I would like to thank our officers for the very hard work they put in to producing this document. It's quite huge and it has a lot of detail in there. Our concept was to make this new local plan like no others that have been done before. What we have learnt from experience is that residents with their local knowledge, together with their input and the desire to get involved, will be at the heart of this local plan. When we started the local plan making process, we consulted with both the parishes and town council, together with local residents who attended the various sessions up and down the district, enabling them to voice the issues of concern to them. Most were unaware of how much influence they could have on vitally needed improvements to their locality. Our concern has always been to get residents involved at the earliest stages of plan making to enrich the process, or else we may miss out on the possibility of identifying all the necessary infrastructure and amenities needed within their local communities. It has also been previously mentioned that ideally it should be infrastructure first where a development requires it. Previous governments, Labour, Coalition and Conservative, have set targets for housing delivery, which councils have had to comply with, often at odds with the local community. It has also become obvious to us that without the protection of a statutory local plan and what it gives us, we would be open season for developers to build anywhere. For the present, how do we deal with the immediate impact presented of a possible identified housing need of 7,500 houses over the next 20 years? Firstly, this is an unconstrained need. Secondly, that need is inclusive of already allocated land with planning permissions in place awaiting development. And thirdly, the local plan we are embarking on will catalogue the issues identified in the independent evidence-based reports regarding the current constraints. This body of evidence covers a large variety of issues,
amongst which both the environmental and infrastructural constraints figures highly. It is important to repeat, emphasise and understand that the 7,500 figure is an unconstrained need which as yet takes no consideration of the current environmental and infrastructural restrictions prevalent in the district that could possibly demonstrate a need to reduce the level of identified housing need. Good plan making will identify the most appropriate locations and ensure we build in the right places. We still need houses for our local needs. What you can be assured of is that we are here to uphold that democratic process of asking, listening, explaining, debating, and then deciding the best way forward that benefits our local residents long term. And this will be available to the press as well. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman.
Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not going to do any political point scoring this evening either, except that I will say that in terms of a risk of open season, I can't say that I've noticed it in Castle Point, Basildon, or indeed Brentwood. So maybe that was something which was said in 2006-7, which hasn't been borne out. Nevertheless, this council is embarking on its second local plan, whilst other districts haven't even managed to deliver one. Chairman, this public consultation is important. It's very important in shaping the future of our district. And I hope the council will, amongst other forms of communication, will approve a leaflet to be delivered to every home, so everyone has the opportunity and awareness of the public consultation that we're going to agree to tonight. It's also absolutely important that every ward councillor, I'll repeat that, every ward councillor has a long, hard look at the evidence and challenge with facts if 7,500 new dwellings are possible and whether it could deliver an acceptable balance of life in all aspects for our residents. It is clearly not. It's not acceptable. But, as other members have stood and said, we must prove it before a planning inspector at a public examination in due course. Personally, I don't think that the real infrastructural needs, not just a few junctions, can be materially improved because of both physical and monetary constraints. I remember standing in 2008 and getting agreement from the then portfolio holder, Councillor Hudson, should I say former Councillor Hudson, saying that we needed £2 billion to do something really decent to improve, yet alone the highway infrastructure in our district. Quite frankly, having listened to the Chancellor at the budget, it ain't going to happen. It ain't going to happen. And yes, I do come from Essex. Our council itself needs to become the champion of the big picture, because I can't see anybody else willing to take on this responsibility. I've heard absolutely nothing from any MPs on the subject. I've heard nothing actually from any county councillors tonight either, or before. And as Councillor Sperring said, infrastructure first. Yeah, that's what it should be, infrastructure first. The number is going to be proven unacceptable. But what number it will be and where houses that we need will be built, I don't know. Councillor Hoy and I in 2008 proposed that we only had the number of houses we needed to meet our local needs. We were laughed at, Councillor Hoy. I was called openly in the chamber and on the online focus, which Chris Black managed so well, that I was a member of the Passport from Pimlico party. Well, I'm proud of that still. And that's where we need to be. We need to be not with this 7,500, we need to be for the number we need locally and can be completely supported by the infrastructure we have and not some wish list that we'd like to see. It isn't going to happen. We have to work with what we've got, and tinkering at the edges is not going to be sufficient to generate a huge number of houses. That is why we need the views of stakeholders, residents and any organisation which will help provide the evidence. I've just got one question, Chairman, which I kind of missed at Planning Policy Subcommittee. We're not going to deliver this until 2021, but the plan is for 2017 to 37. So when we deliver this, we're going to be delivering a shortfall. I wonder if we meant 2021 to 2041, Chairman. I would like to hear from the officers as to how we deal with that particular issue. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Thomas. Stand up.
Sorry, yeah. Thank you, Chairman. Just in response, and this is my experience from doing plans in the past, you don't actually have to have the start date starting when the plan is adopted. A lot of plans start prior to that date starting, and that's the same for our plan. If you think an example of when we had regional planning and when the regional plan was adopted and when that start date for the housing, that was prior to the start of many other plans starting, and that was the case for Rochford, Southend and other South Essex authorities. So it doesn't have to be the case that you start the plan and adopt it as the start date of when you adopt that plan, if that helps.
Thank you. Councillor Cutmore. Oh.
I'd like to come back on that because that didn't answer the whole of my question. Forgive me, but I'm going to say, okay, so we start with a shortfall. Okay, we are short because we'll have only been delivering 250 at best a year plus windfalls, which don't count anyway. So if we start off short of the whatever figure is the fully constrained need, how do we catch up? Thank you, Chairman.
The start date is just the start of the plan period, so it's not a shortfall from when you adopt it. You've already started delivering from that period prior to that adoption date because houses have already come forward before that date. So there's a plan period that may be 15, 20 years, and you have a shortfall if you're not delivering to that target, yes. So even if you adopt in 21, if you have a start date before that, that's when your plan period actually begins. And that's the same, that's not unusual for a plan.
Councillor Cutmore.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to thank the officers and those members on the Planning Policy Committee and those that supported them for producing this document. Which, I mean, 251 pages, Chairman, is not, is not a light document. Not every member can know every word that's in there, but I think they'll read the bits that they want to read, and certainly the bits that relate to their own wards. I think that's quite the correct thing to do, to actually look at your own area. But obviously, as a district councillor, you've got to look to the whole district as to how you consider how things can be delivered in a sustainable and proper way. Yes, we've got a long timetable leading up to this, and I think part 4 of this agenda is actually about that timetable and how we take things forward. But having said that, I think this is the beginning of the beginning, if you like, as far as our local plan is concerned. But I think those who sit in this chamber who were at the last planning process that we went through will remember the pain, the inward looking, and indeed the legal challenges that we had relating to that plan. But having said that, having a plan, and I think it's already been mentioned, has actually stopped development. And if I look over to my fellow councillors around us, there have been challenges. there have been legal constraints. There's one at the moment, I think, there's a legal technicality relating to a development over in Castle Point. So I don't accept that. I think we would be open to the firing line for developers on things like Coombs Farm. Because if you think about Coombs Farm, the only reason we actually defended that was because we had a plan. If you look at Hawkwell West, Chairman, and the Christmas Tree Farm, originally there was an application for 300 odd houses. Well, we managed to reduce that to the proper 175 that we had because we had a plan. If we hadn't had that plan, it would be very difficult to resist what came along. So the planning process actually does work for our area, and it does work in accordance with what we're wanting for the district and what the public are wanting. But I think it's incredibly important that those that can contribute do contribute. I think we should try and put something so that we make sure that every household that wants to contribute to this, and to make sure that where they do contribute, they're doing it on the lines that they actually know something about their area and make sure that they can do something. I don't think you're going to get too many people that want to have development near them, but of course we do gain things from development, and you know those things have come forward, and I think people forget that too. But I'm looking forward to the debate on this if there is going to be a debate, but I think it's the right way forward, that we're going to go forward, and as I say, yeah, I think it's been said, we're very much ahead of the game in Rochford, and we should be proud of that.
Councillor Mr Hoy.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I won't say a lot. I think a lot of it's been sent by Councillor Cutmore and Councillor Mr Mason already. I wasn't quite here at this stage at the first plan. I was a resident who was not aware of what was going on with this process, and I would like to say to Councillor Sparing that I think the process so far is far better than that time, and I think he understands the issues residents have around what they consider the consultation then. I did ask him at the subcommittee if I could ask questions. He said no because of time constraints. All I will say is that I think the subcommittee was very good, and I think all my questions were answered. There's a few which weren't, but they've come out either afterwards with emails to officers or will come out through the consultation process, I believe. I could only echo what Councillor Mr Mason has said, which is this is very important for residents to respond to and for councillors to respond to, and to understand how they respond with evidence of why the numbers are constrained on the 7,500, why transport may be an issue, not just because it is. If you read the inspector's report from the first local plan, you will see that, yes, he was happy that this evidence was being supplied in figure format, but there was no evidence produced from that why it would affect the numbers, why they should change. So although people provided figures, they didn't provide them as evidence and demonstrate how they would, in technical terms, affect those numbers. And this is where it's important we do that. I think the leaflets are very important. I think a leaflet through the door on its own isn't. I think it has to be a well-written leaflet. I'd just like confirmation of if that's going to be written by Natalie or by our communications team. I think she's done a very good job with this report. It's much more readable than the first one. I think Councillor Mason, Mr Mason said that at the subcommittee actually, and I would just like to know the answer to that. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to confirm that it's a joint leaflet, so it would be between the policy officers in consultation with their communications team, and for everything that we're doing, we are doing that in consultation with our communications team to make sure that it is understandable and it contains the right information as well.
Councillor Hookway.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. There was a matter that was brought up at the planning training session which involved a little bit of a discussion, and it was was asked of the officers that whether they could attempt to make as much to capture potential windfall within the scope of this document and how the process was going to happen. It was interesting to go back and analyse some of the figures from the previous 10 years to see that on average 38 homes per annum were built as windfall. And if we look at the figures of potential numbers, that's over 10% of what we might be looking at in the future. So I think it's important that the document is as comprehensive as possible, and that the councillors can help our officers to identify potential windfall sites, so that nothing is left, no stone is left unturned, and that we can provide as much evidence that we've done a comprehensive job with this report and the future process as well. Another thing that is constantly mentioned is about local need and homes for local people. The reality is that we do not have an overall control on this, because most of the properties end up being on the market, and therefore they can end up being sold outside of this district to people coming in from wherever. We've already got evidence of some local authorities purchasing properties within the district to accommodate their needs, and they're homeless. So I think we all need to be aware of that situation, and I think we should be trying to make sure that whatever properties come forward are those which are homes that our local residents can afford, and not just properties which fill the bank balances of large developers. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just as an interesting response to Councillor Hookway, in regards to local homes, we actually had a conversation with the Hall Road, where they were selling the houses, and apparently it would seem that with the exception of one property which had been sold to people who lived in Hutton, all the rest were apparently being bought by local people at that moment, and that was very interesting as far as we were concerned. That was the take-up. In regard to Councillor Mason's suggestion, where we have the leaflets, I think this was well discussed at the meeting we had, and I would fully support the fact of those leaflets. And in fact, one of the things that had been discussed to keep the cost down with regard to delivering, I know that some of the wards, especially let's say my own lodge, and I know Trinity, they were prepared to actually go out and deliver those leaflets. But I believe that Managing Director Sean Scrutton has actually identified a costing which would come within the budget. And if this council are minded to go down that road of being happy for that budget to be allocated, I would support that. Thank you.
Councillor Mrs Mason was next.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd like to go back to the question of numbers with the officer, because although he's obviously attempted to explain it, I'm afraid that it hasn't appeared clear to me. I think we understand that with an emerging plan that the date doesn't matter, it goes to 2037, whenever it's adopted, and that bit is quite clear. But the numbers aren't clear. At the moment, under our existing plan, we're providing, hopefully, optimistically, 250 homes a year. Therefore, at the moment, from 2017, 18, 19 to whenever this new plan is adopted, we don't know what the numbers will be under that new plan. Now, just for argument's sake, for round numbers, if that's 500, the emerging plan, we won't know what the numbers are going to be. So we will be providing 250 houses a year. So for argument's sake, if the plan was finally adopted in 2020, which is 3 years down the line, we're already, and if it was 500, we're 750 short. And that's how I see it. If I'm wrong, please clarify, because I can't see that if the emerging plan isn't adopted at a later stage, and we are then therefore delivering at the lower rate of our existing plan, that there won't be a shortfall that would then have an impact on the other years. Please clarify. Thank you.
Yes, only to clarify that, yes, there will be a shortfall for that period beforehand, yes, if that helps you. Yeah.
Councillor Mr Mason.
Thank you, Chairman. Slightly out of order, but no, not out of order, just out of order. Gosh, that was nearly a mistake, wasn't it? Councillor Ward stood and supported the recommendation from the Planning Policy Committee. We're both, well, he was a member as a substitute, but I'm a member of it. Yes, I've said before, I think leafleting every house will be, you know, a truly excellent thing to do. We do have a budget. That budget was acquired around a year ago, maybe a bit more than a year actually, in July 16 I think it was, and £15,000, and you know, from what I know of the costs of leaflets and delivery, that budget will do it, and I hope the council through the portfolio holder use the budget, and it's a portfolio holder's decision at that level. There's a further aspect about the leaflets. Obviously members are concerned that they are fit for the purpose, and they do give the message that members want to get across to residents, and that is that this is very important, it is about our future, all that, you know, all those appropriate constructions around it. And I wondered whether the Planning Policy Subcommittee should come back together very rapidly when the draft's available and take a look at it before it's commissioned, just to make sure that that engagement hits in exactly the way members would like to see it. That is something that I hope that the administration can take forward and see happen. Thank you, Chairman.
If council wishes to take that approach, yes.
Chairman, if I may, just for clarification in relation to the budget, I've actually checked after the Planning Policy Subcommittee meeting, and there is no budget. Therefore, members this evening will need to agree to put that budget forward in order to deal with the leafleting issue. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Sperring.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I think two items have come to notice straight away. As Chairman of the subcommittee, I have no problem if they feel it would be appropriate to have a quick meeting to look at the leaflet and sign off on that, or make any amendments as need be. I think we need to have, you know, it's going to be an as and when, and very quickly done. With regard to the budget, I don't quite understand, because that conversation was had at that time, and I would recommend then that if that is the case, that there is an amendment to the recommendation that this budget is found and that we support it. I have no problem with that at all, Chairman. Thank you.
Question.
To say, I think the original allocation that was mentioned within the report was 15,000. Are we still looking at that figure?
Yes, Chairman.
So we've got a motion and you've seconded it. So is that agreed?
Agreed. So what that means is that, you know, money's to be found for it.
Yeah.
And also that it will be approved by the subcommittee, the actual leaflet.
Yeah.
Something like that. If
Right.
there's no one else to speak, just take members through each one, maybe.
Right, if there's nobody else to speak on this, we'll go through the recommendations one by one. So number 1 is that the draft issues and options document and accompanying interim sustainability appraisal as attached at Appendix A and B respectively be published for formal public consultation for up to 12 weeks. Is that agreed? Number 2, that the Sustainability Appraisal Scoping Report as attached as Appendix C to be noted as evidence and published on the Council's website. Is that agreed? Number 3, that the activities set out in the consultation and engagement summary as attached at Appendix D be noted and published on the Council's website. Is that agreed? And number 4 is that leaflet circulation to all properties in the district be included as part of the public consultation, and that is not using the existing leaflets budget, but ensuring that that budget is found from existing, and that the leaflet before it's delivered is approved by the subcommittee. Is that agreed? Thank you. So we now go to item 4, which is the new local plan issues and options document, Local Development Scheme 2017 to 21. Councillor Sperring.
Thank you, Chairman. I think most of the criteria that we've discussed already and has been stated both by myself, Councillor Ward, and the timetable that has subsequently been submitted is all pretty legible, and therefore, as Chairman, subject to members wishing to ask any further questions, I would make the recommendation be accepted by this Council. Thank you.
Seconder? Is that agreed? Sorry. You can speak if you wish to, yeah.
This would be in line with my colleague, Councillor Mason, where he has suggested that we as a council should be someone who actually is at the forefront of questioning the national policy on this. We are all very aware in our areas of the issues there are with the infrastructure. We can't ignore it. One of the things that I've looked at in my ward, in Hockley, with what has actually appeared on the plan there, Hockley has a particularly hotbed issue of parking. On the area plan, we have there the Hockley station car park is down for consideration for development. It's lunacy. What I'd like to see is that where there is infrastructure there already, we are not using those infrastructure sites to satisfy this plan. It seems completely dull. Now, I understand that this is just the first step at the moment, and none of this has been confirmed. But we need to actually approach this from a point of view of logic as well as legal requirements. If we are putting forward areas of where we've got actual infrastructure and we are considering actually taking that out by putting the area plan in, it seems a bit crazy. So I'm asking if it's possible if we could actually include in the risk list there, risk list of this, if we could actually include the cooperation of, or non-cooperation of Essex County on the issue of infrastructure. And I'd like to ask on the back of that, as there are members within this chamber who are also members of county, if we can rely on them to be pushing our case at county. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Thomas, can you answer that? Comment, please.
As far as the SCI is concerned, yeah, we don't see any issue with adding an extra risk related to infrastructure delivery by Essex County Council as our statutory partner in this. So, yeah, that's fine.
Councillor Cutmore.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm glad to answer, if you like, and I'm sure my fellow county councillors who are in this chamber would also agree. I mean, one of the last resolutions that were, apart from the resolution relating to infrastructure first, that we put through, was a resolution relating to, if you like, the movement of traffic and the main thoroughfares that we go through. And I know that the local members here that spoke at that meeting spoke about the 127 and how it is important strategically for Rochford to make sure that we can actually get a flow of traffic going out from Rochford. So, you know, there is that support from County Council. There is that push from the county councillors to actually do that. But obviously it depends on the individual developments that we're looking for within the future. Now, if you look through the current local plan, there's a list of actually the infrastructure requirements to meet the development of those specific areas in there. And by and large, they've been met as far as the local plan is concerned. And what I'd like to see within the new local plan is for that to continue to make sure that every development that's going to come forward in a sustainable way does actually include the infrastructure requirements for that. And that's a part of, if you like, including that development going forward, because without it, it's going to be difficult to actually deliver that development in a sustainable way. So I'm agreeing with my colleague in the fact that, you know, you need to have that infrastructure to be put in to make sure we get sustainable development going forward. But having said that, of course, some of these things cost money. Not all the 106 monies or whatever monies come forward will do that. But we're seeking government grants through the County Council to make sure that some of those come forward. So there is ongoing work. I'm also working with other local councils within the south of Essex to make sure that we actually work on a joint plan going forward, and we all know what each other's doing because there are synergies between us. Because people, it was interesting to look at that and see that there's actually more commuters going to Southend than there are to London, which was a surprise to me. You know, there's quite a few that go to Chelmsford, Basildon, etc. So I think that's the sort of information that we need to prove our case, to say that we need this infrastructure. It's also interesting in Rochford because we don't have many of the industries that other areas do, such as Basildon, which I think accounts for something like 22% of the gross domestic product of Essex. And of course people will go to those jobs. And I think I know the last figures, and it was a few years ago I saw the figures, I think we had 14,000 net out commuters every day. We also have people going through our district who'd rather not go through the 127 at Southend and choose to go through it. But that's life as we have it. Improvements to the 127 are even more important because of that. So going forward, Chairman, I think that's very important. But all of this going forward and what's been mentioned should be part of that consultation coming forward. So be under no illusion, Chairman, that's the important thing. If there are issues like that, that's where the consultation comes in and that's where it should go. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Steptoe.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to concur with my fellow county member and also agree with the member for Hockley behind me. In my role as Deputy Portfolio Holder for Economic Development at County, the other members there are getting mighty sick of me, keep banging on about the A127. If anybody has met Ron Howard, and he mentions Canvey at every possible opportunity, including when he met Prince Charles the other day, I'm using his tactics. Believe you me that what I refer to as the A127 economic corridor, right the way from here, from Southend, right the way through to the M25, is a very, very important and key issue throughout the whole of South East Essex. And believe you me, every single opportunity I get to bang on about it, I do. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Mr High.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to raise a couple of points on the back of what Councillor Cutmore said. I think the issues, I'll be brief. Two of the issues we have with Essex County Council are that they do everything piecemeal. All of the infrastructure is considered on a application or by a site basis, not as an overall big picture, we might want to call it. That's that. That's simple. I'll leave that there. On a point about, by and large, all the infrastructure improvements were delivered by the local plan, which were mentioned in the local plan. On the whole bridge, SER 6A and B, it was mentioned specifically in the plan, and it was also mentioned specifically by the inspector that any building there should include the improvements, including the raising the bed of Watertree Lane to a height above sea level. Those were not done. So just as a point, it is, although you may think there are some important parts which were not done.
Councillor Mr Mason.
Thank you, Chairman. I thought we were all popping off to have a nightcap, but clearly not. So I'll try and be brief too. It's good to hear that the A127 is a focus, but the A127 is not everything in terms of infrastructure in this district. And tackling infrastructural improvements, development by development, doesn't take into account, as Councillor Hoy said, but I'll repeat it, the big picture, because you know these developments pass traffic on one to another, yet alone one to another on the roads other than the B1013. And not just talking about the side roads, but also the side roads need to get onto the next roads. And although I'm not terribly acquainted with the problems in Rayleigh, people tell me about London Road, and they tell me about the problems with London Road and its connection to the A130 and other roads within Rayleigh. And I can also tell you, because the B1013 is the most important road in my area, the central part of the district, that also is something that needs to be looked at and be given investment if we're going to be able to support an increase in the number of houses that we're currently delivering on this plan that we have in place. And as I said earlier, I want to see evidence. I want to see evidence that there is the money, the will, and the activity from both government and county and the district council that to improve all the infrastructure, not just focus on the A127, but all the infrastructure in our district, which improves things for the lives of everyone that lives here and comes here. And if we don't do that, then sadly we can't support anything like this number at all. And as I said earlier, you'll have to fit the number of houses to the infrastructure we've got. Big picture is important, but I'm talking about the picture just below that. So if you've got your big screen, you've got your next screen, and the next screen is the important one for me. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Hookway.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm glad that the issue of infrastructure has been brought up and debated in here and discussed. The focus of attention has been on roads, very important to a lot of our residents. But I want members to not forget that the infrastructure is not just purely about roads, it's also about other public services too, in relation to schools and medical and health services as well. We must make sure that we provide evidence to back up needs for support for these areas, as it's a main issue for many of my local residents about how they do find that the current situation, let alone future situations with regard to health and schools, is not sufficient for them presently. Thank you.
Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Chairman, for letting me come back. I think, you know, in answer to Councillor Hookway's question, it's so important to get involvement with residents. As we've said, it is the residents, we want the residents to be involved, we need the local knowledge that they can bring. We went out to Canewdon, we got the views from there, we went out to Great Wakering, we went to all the parishes initially to talk to them. We need to enlarge that. We need more residents putting their input, their local knowledge into what we need as the basic infrastructure, the basic amenities that will come from development. So it's a case of where development will need to come, we need to ensure that we get the right 106 agreements in place that the local residents want and need. And I think that's the important thing. Thank you.
Right, thank you, councillors. We've got a proposer and seconder for the recommendation.
It's up to you, Chairman.
All right, I'll take it, yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd like to point out that from the planning subcommittee the other day when we was there, and Councillor Ward actually came up with a quite diagnosis of we continue to build, and sooner or later we're going to come to a grinding halt if we don't get this infrastructure. And that's exactly what he said. We will come to a grinding halt if we don't get the infrastructure. And all that. And I remember you saying that, and I think Mr Mason said that. Yes, you did. Yes, you did. And I think he's quite right what he said on that principle, and I'd like to leave it like there. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I apologise. I did not see your hand up. So. Right, so we do have a proposer and a seconder for the recommendation that is in item 4. Would the proposer and seconder be happy for something about infrastructure to be put into this, the revised local development scheme regarding the infrastructure?
With regard to the risk, I don't think we had any objection. I don't think we have any objection to putting that in there, to be noted that
Right.
it is a risk.
Yeah. Right, thank you. So that's the recommendation then. Is that agreed, councillors? Agreed. Thank you. And I now close the meeting at 8:40 p.m.
Please be upstanding as the chairman and managing director leave the chamber.
Thank you.